Is there balanced grace, the birth of Protestantism? The Protestant Reformation began on October 31, 1517. It started with a signal made by Martin Luther when he nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the castle church in Wittenberg, which stated his unique views different from the common and traditional teachings of the Catholic Church. If there were no Martin Luther who stood up and said that forgiveness cannot be bought with indulgences, and that salvation is not through works or additional works of God's grace, the whole world might have been consumed by the common and traditional teachings of the Catholic Church. Martin Luther fought for the five solas. First, sola scriptura, scripture alone. Second, sola fide, faith alone. Third, sola gratia, grace alone. Fourth, solus Christus, Christ alone. And fifth, soli Deo gloria, to the glory of God alone. Controversial issue. You should teach the balanced grace and not hyper grace. This so-called balanced grace is an outright attack to neutralize the teaching of full grace. First, they attempted to suppress it through persecution. Second, they attempted to dilute it through adoption. And because of the Reformation, the glory of the true gospel of full grace has been restored. The decline of the evangelical church during this time is due to the diluted gospel. Notice carefully, what is the difference between the gospel of the Catholic Church and that of the majority of the so-called evangelical church? Sad to say, there is none. Our gospel should not be like theirs because there has been a reformation. Our gospel should be full graced because we are not Catholics. However, there are evangelical churches whose gospel is the same as that of the Catholics, by works or by grace plus works. The only difference is the status. It's almost like a Catholic without the status. Third, they want to neutralize the gospel of full grace, so now what they are promoting is balanced grace. Let's deal with this squarely. What does balanced grace mean? Can grace be balanced? Where will you balance it? How will you balance it? Grace is not balance. How will you balance two things that have different weights? When you say balance, it means the weights are the same. Are the weights of law and grace the same? For the law was given by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ. John chapter 1 verse 17. Are the weights of Moses and Jesus Christ the same? Jesus is heavier than Moses. The law was given by a servant, but grace and truth came by the Son. The Son is greater or heavier than a servant. A servant does not abide in the house forever. A son does. John chapter 8 verse 35. On the Mount of Transfiguration, Moses and Elijah appeared. When Simon saw this, he immediately said that they should stay there, and he wanted them to make three tabernacles, one for Moses, one for Elijah, and one for Jesus. And while Simon was still speaking, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and the Father in heaven spoke, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear him." Matthew chapter 17, verse 5. Three personalities were mentioned: Moses, Elijah, and Jesus. And the Father said, "Hear him," and not "hear them." The three are not equal. Moses represents the law, Elijah represents the prophets, and Jesus represents the fullness of grace. What did the Father say? Hear him, hear the fullness of grace. What those enemies of grace want is to balance the works and grace, the works of Christ and our works. We often hear this old saying, "Mercy is God's, but works are of men. Nasa Diyos ang awa, nasa tao ang gawa." This is not biblical. Sometimes there are even pastors who quote this in their sermons. The truth is, mercy and works are of God. Man is merely the recipient and has no part except to receive the abundant grace of God. This kind of thinking blocks the throat of the enemies of grace. They cannot accept that humans have no part. The original sin is pride, the arrogance of Lucifer lead him to rebel against God. Isaiah chapter 14. The deceptive teaching of this is often heard from pastors saying that salvation is a combination of grace and faith, along with a quote from Ephesians chapter 2 verse 8, "For it is by grace you have been saved through faith." They are saying grace is God's part and faith is man's part. This is wrong. Faith is not a part of man. Faith is also a gift bestowed by God through the word of Christ. Apostle Paul wrote, "Consequently, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is here through the word of Christ." Romans chapter 10, verse 17. In the original Greek, this is accurate. In Greek, the word used is rhematos Christo, literally word of Christ. This is very important because what Apostle Paul refers to as rhematos Christo, or the word of Christ, according to the broader context of the book of Romans, is the gospel of Christ. "For I am not ashamed of the gospel of Christ, for it is the power of God to salvation for everyone who believes, for the Jew first and also for the Greek." Romans chapter 1 verse 16. Faith is not part of man's equation for salvation. Salvation is solely the work of God, and it is received by man as a gift. A person in his fallen state has no faith and has no ability to believe in the works of God. Man is spiritually dead. Ephesians chapter 2 verse 1. We did not seek God. We were sought by God. Luke chapter 19 verse 10. Faith came to us when we heard the message of grace. Faith comes from God through the gospel of Christ. Romans chapter 1 verse 16. The message of the cross. 1 Corinthians chapter 1 verse 18. And the gospel of the grace of God. Acts chapter 20 verse 24. When we heard the gospel, we had faith. When the faith came from the gospel, we called out. When we called out, we were saved, because it is written, "For whoever calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved." Romans chapter 10 verse 13. To God be the glory. God bless you.